That's when I really realized that my lessons with Jason Xenakis, the brother of the musician and architect, these lessons were very important because I really knew that the way that the minimalists were approaching art was really contextually very closed and deductive and not open. So I continued to make the latex painting, and this one I called Bounce. And I remember that Dan Flavin and Saul LeWitt were both at the opening, and there was a Chuck Close in the same room at the Bikert Gallery. And I remember Dan Flavin saying to me, well, and also Saul thought the same thing because Saul was doing the grids in ink, very refined cross-hatch grids. He said, well, Lynda, I like this other painting better, the marbleized painting, the long one that I pulled out of the Whitney. They said, because this one has a figure in ground. If you could believe it, there were big audiences next to panels, sitting as we are at a long table with artists, renowned artists, discussing is easel painting dead, and should there be a figure with a ground? I mean, you know, the absurdity of what art should be. Another time of transition was the semi-flexible polyurethane foam. I wanted to be able to get out of my studio with a larger piece without rolling it up, but I wanted to build up. So I began working with semi-flexible foam and made pieces, various pieces, and also where I was using phosphorescence, so they glowed in the dark. I also tried that with the wax paintings, but it never worked out exactly, but these did. And this particular form, later when I got to Guggenheim, I cast into bronze. This is a piece that Clement Greenberg looked at when he was there, and at Paula Cooper Gallery. I installed these and did them at the Paula Cooper Gallery. He walked around and he really, I could tell, wanted to kick it. I could tell. It's just he was so upset. And he scratched his head. And I was watching him do it, and I had to contain my laughter. At the same time, I did not confront him. And often I think, why shouldn't I have? But it was so funny. And I was afraid I would laugh in his face, so I didn't want to do that. This is, at the same time, this is what I did in Dallas-Fort Worth. Henry Hopkins was there, and he was in charge of the Biennale. And at that time, he didn't know what to do. It was during the Vietnam War. There was a lot of protest, and they were going to Washington. And he decided finally that the artists that he had invited, which were big name artists, Rauschenberg and Robert Morris and so forth, he'd invite them to do posters. So there was somebody doing the posters in the Midwest. Bill Weege was his name. So I was commissioned to do this, and at the same time commissioned by Cy Newhouse and Vera Liss. This was, I back up now. With the foam pieces, the first pieces, as I was getting them off the wall, I did that firstly in Germany, and and I did one in New York before I went to Germany, and then one in Germany. I'd actually the idea occurred in Germany because it was a space like you see here, but a little more, where the light was floating from the window behind. So I wanted to use that space, so I decided that I could make a kind of wire screening rolling down and pour this kind of wave coming out from the wall. So I did a whole copper series called 7 Come 11. Then I didn't do the knots anymore, and when I went to India, the person there that I was visiting from the Sarabhai family that lived in the Corbusier house and still have the Corbusier house, where Xenakis worked with Corbusier. And when I was taking logic in Lake Charles, Louisiana, I remember Jason, my logic teacher, telling me that his brother was working with Corbusier and was also a musician. And I took that in, but I didn't know either of them, and I was just meeting my philosophy teacher as a freshman. 17 years old I was, so, and that's what changed my life, I think, the logic class I had in my hometown. And this is another one, which is done after this other one, and I thought of this when I was, again, in Castellorzo, seeing the tiles from Marseille that sort of had slid into the water. I realized that I'd always seen these tiles through gravity sliding into the water after the earthquake there, or just the sea, coming up. And so this is drawing of all these different elements of the clay. In other words, each piece is like a part of the skin of the form. So I've made a form underneath, and what you see is the clay, which I've one by one drawn. So I was cutting the clay, had people cutting the clay very quickly, and I've already had the form, so I was drawing the form on great folds of planes, curved planes. So the form was the clay. And these are barbells, stainless steel. They're obviously very phallic, but very heavy too. And these I call manu. These are made through pinching the hot wax and casting in stainless steel. This is pure silver torsos. These are bronze, and I did a collection of 5 kind of figures that I think are drawn. And I showed them together now in Los Angeles, and I wanted to get them documented in that way because I didn't mean for them to be shown individually. But the walls weren't such. This is how I make them. This is earlier ones, and this is the translucent quality of the polyurethane. And this shows you in the orange, but this is orange egg. This is a blown glass. Most recently, I did some glass mask, African masks that are like vessels. Were shown at the Metropolitan Museum and then at the Texas Gallery. This is the new museum installation with the big latex painting. The installation I liked the best actually is now in MoCA in LA. One of my concerns is space and how we see and how we change space. How do we physically feel something that exists texturally in terms of form? We see proprioceptively, we see texture, we feel texture. And the Gestalt, how do we focus on the edges? How do we see depth? All these things I'm interested in.
You said when you were 17, a philosophy class changed your life, the logic class. So I was very curious to hear more about that.
Just the idea of a choice and the fact that if you choose wrongly, and whether there's right or wrong, or you go in a direction that you don't have the choices, then that's probably a no-go. So I think choices in one's life are so important. You want the freedom to make the choices.